In a forgotten library where the air smells of soot and silence, there is a book that breathes, not with lungs, but with memory, its parchment sighing when the wind brushes the stained glass windows of the cloister. The monks who once guarded it are long turned to dust, their names erased, their prayers brittle with age. Only the book remains, heavy as a heart, light as a whisper. It waits beneath layers of dust, vines of time curling around its bindings like fingers reluctant to let go. They call it the Voynich manuscript now, though it wore no name for centuries. Its pages were not written, they were conjured. Coiled symbols dance like roots in delirium, looping with purpose yet denying meaning. No Latin, no Greek, no tongue of man matches its inked rhythm. Each letter resembles a petal plucked from a dream that refused to bloom. It was found in 1912, hidden in the back of a locked trunk in a Jesuit library near Rome. Wilfrid Voynich, a collector of ancient oddities, opened the chest expecting forgotten Bibles, discarded liturgies, but instead he found something that breathed like it had been holding its breath for 500 years. The manuscript is small in size but vast in strangeness. Over 200 vellum pages, penned with unwavering discipline, inked in a script that dances and spirals, never hesitating, never correcting. It moves like someone dreaming through a pen. Along the margins and within the folds of the book are drawings, women bathing in what appear to be greenish pools, their bodies relaxed, their faces blank. Some hold tubes like roots, others are tangled in vines that wrap around them with a lover's grip. There are plants depicted, 200 of them each, unknown to the world. Botanists stare, squint, and fail. These aren't plants that grow in soil. They look like they were pulled from the garden of a god who had never seen earth but tried to imagine it. Roots that shimmer like tentacles, flowers that bend backwards into themselves. No known flora matches their design, yet they seem eerily familiar, like something half forgotten in a fevered sleep. Some pages shift into charts astronomical, or perhaps astrological, depicting galaxies that should not be seen with eyes alone. Wheels within wheels, suns wrapped in vines, moons pierced with spears of ink. Was it the calendar of another world, or a code to crack the one we inhabit? Code breakers came, and they failed during World War II. Top cryptologists who once unraveled the twisted whispers of Nazi transmissions tried their hands at its cipher. They left defeated, muttering of madness, of traps in language, of sentences that slithered under their tools like living things. The NSA tried, linguists tried, dreamers tried. Some said the language was an invented code, a forgotten dialect, a lost tongue of an empire erased from the earth. Others said it was gibberish, a meaningless game. But none could explain the precision of its construction, the symmetry, the internal rules that seemed too coherent for nonsense. And then there are the whispers, the tales not found in libraries, but in wine-stained letters, hushed phone calls, and curatorial warnings. One archivist claimed to see words shift under candlelight. A translator, after months of studying it, claimed the book whispered to him in sleep, not in words, but in longing. He left his post, retreated into the hills, and refused to speak again. When asked, he only wept and pointed skyward. There is something in the book that refuses capture, like a feral animal with the scent of blood still fresh on its teeth. Some believe it is alchemical, a recipe for life, or perhaps death, a blueprint for eternal gardens or infernal gates. Others believe it is divine madness, the final scribbles of a monk whose mind bloomed too far beyond sanity. And still others claim it is not from here, at all not from earth, not from time, not from anything we can name. The parchment, tested and verified, dates to the early 1400s, a time when Europe was dancing in plague and prophecy, when monasteries became the last lungs of the written word, and ink could damn or save a soul. But the style of writing does not match the time, nor the art, nor the mind that made it. No known person claims authorship. No trail of ownership leads clearly through history. It simply appears, a ghost in a library, a seed that sprouted in secret, its roots burrowed into the fabric of mystery itself. And yet the book is not cold. It feels warm to those who touch it, as if it remembers being held. The ink, though faded, carries a scent not of decay, but of lavender, myrrh, and damp leaves. It is as if it was not written in ink at all, but in breath. Some nights, when the library is quiet and the moon touches the stained glass just so, the book seems to glow, not with light, but with attention, as though it knows it is being watched, as though it is watching back. What if it is not a book at all? What if it is a mirror, not of our world, but of our sleep? A dream journal of something ancient, vast, and voiceless, perhaps not meant for us to read, but to feel, to fall into like water, to dissolve within like ink in milk, because when you stare long enough, something begins to happen. The words soften, the plants stir, the women in the green pools blink, and for a moment, just a flicker, you wonder if the book is reading you. There are things in this world not meant to be translated, only experienced, not spoken aloud, but dreamt in silence. The Voynich manuscript is one of them. A forest in a language no mouth can shape, a vine twisting through centuries, tightening with every touch, and in that tightening is not fear but invitation. Come closer, it says, closer, turn the page, dream me, in the breathless heat of the Valley of Mexico, where the sun does not rise, burns, the earth remembers, not through voices or stone, but through ash. Beneath centuries of silence and soil, buried under layers of molten rock and forgotten fear, lies something not meant to be unearthed, not a tomb, not a temple, a fragment of a song once carved in fire and bound in death. The codex they dare not name aloud. They say it was found not by scholars, but by accident a laborer digging deep foundations for a tourist road outside what remains of Teotihuacan. His spade struck bone, not human, but animal white, smooth, and unnaturally warm, as if remembering flame. Wrapped in blackened leather, frayed at the edges, was a book that did not open easily. Its jaguar skin cover flaked like dried blood. Its pages hissed when touched, like meat on iron. Curators call it, in whispers only, the Codex of Fire and Bone, a name given in fear, not fact. For the glyphs within etched, not painted, scorched into thin sheets of agave pulpar, unlike any seen before or since. No Nahuatl speaker recognizes them. No translator finds their shape in known roots. The symbols writhe in curves too perfect, too violent, to be coincidence. They mimic wind. They mimic claws. The codex is not whole. It is broken, fragmented, incomplete, like the memory of a fever. Only 7 pages survive, and even these shift. They are not fixed. The ink seems too dull when exposed to sunlight, too. Grows sharper beneath moonlight. One page depicts 2 suns crossing paths above a dark pyramid, one bleeding into the other. Another shows human figures with flayed skin, bowed before a god whose face is a burning skull. And on the last page, drawn with bone-colored strokes, is a spiral of stars encircling a mouth. Some believe it is a star map. Others say it is a prophecy. But the oldest among the curators, those who still carry the scent of copal from their grandmothers' homes, say it is a warning, a song of something not born from earth, but sealed within it, a hymn that remembers being screamed. Teotihuacan was once a city of gods, not figuratively, but deliberately. The avenue of the dead runs straight as a blade, lined with temples that rise like teeth into the smog-heavy sky. It predates the Aztec, predates written history. No one knows who built it. The Aztecs themselves believed it was the work of giants, of divine architects. They named it the place where gods were born. But birth implies pain. Archaeologists have long whispered of the city's final days of sudden collapse, of a fire not sparked by nature, but by purpose. Temples burned from within, statues shattered not by time, but by hands in ritual frenzy. The bones of the dead were scattered, many of them showing signs of sacrifice, precise cuts, drained veins, skulls painted with cinnabar. And now this codex, dug from the ash of that collapse, seems to carry the echo of that ending. Or perhaps its cause. The Spanish missionaries who came after tried to destroy it. Their records speak vaguely of pagan pages and heretical fire texts, but the codex itself is never named. One priest, Fray Rodrigo de Soria, wrote only, "It sings when burned." We buried it with quicklime and prayer. Yet the book survived. It was not destroyed. Weighted scholars today refuse to display it. It sits in a humidity-controlled vault beneath an unnamed museum, catalogued under a false entry. Those who study it too long begin to report dreams, visions of twin suns, of humming blood. One researcher claimed the book rearranged itself when left alone overnight. Another was found whispering to it in Nahuatl, though he never learned the language. He was dismissed quietly, his lips cracked and blackened as if kissed by flame, and the smoke still lingers. Every time the codex is handled, no matter how gently, a faint scent rises: burnt agave, blood, and something else. Something sweet and sickly like charred flowers. One page bears a circular stain, not ink, not mold. It pulses slightly when warm breath nears it, a fingerprint or something older. No photographs exist of its full contents. Cameras malfunction, scanners fail. One attempt to digitize the pages resulted in a black screen and a burst of static that made the archivist weep uncontrollably. He claimed he heard layered voices humming beneath the static, as though the codex had opened its mouth through the machine. It is not language in the way we understand it. It is memory, and memory cannot always be spoken without consequence. Some now speculate that codex was a ritual object, not a record, but a key. A tool used in blood rites, meant not to invoke the gods, but to bind them, or to keep something out, or in. A tether forged of bone, fire, and song, because the final page, the most fragile, depicts not humans, not gods, but something else entirely made of smoke, with antlered crowns and open jaws, rising from a chasm in the earth. Their eyes are stars, their hands are spears, and around them, written in a ring, are glyphs repeated nowhere else in the manuscript. They glow faintly when touched. No one has read them aloud. No one dares. The last researcher who tried collapsed mid-syllable, clutching his throat. He survived, but his voice never returned, so the book rests in silence now, wrapped again in jaguar hide, placed inside a steel box, sealed beneath layers of prayer and protocol. Yet it dreams, You can feel it if you stand near. A faint warmth, the sense that something inside it stirs not angrily, not urgently, but with expectation, as though waiting for the right voice, the right blood. And what if the book is not meant to be understood? What if understanding is the lock, not the key? What if its mystery is not what it hides, but what it awakens in those who seek it? In the end, the codex of fire and bone remains a breath from a dying god, or perhaps a god yet unborn. Each page a pulse, each word a flicker of flame trapped in flesh. We do not know who wrote it. We do not know what it seals, or sings, or summons. We only know it endures, and whatever it holds inside has not finished speaking. The desert covers it again now. Sand, time, silence. But even buried, some things still burn. They say some books were never written, only bled, that their ink was drawn not from quills and wells, but from the marrow of men who saw too much, who knelt not before altars of gold, but before thresholds of shadow. And in one forgotten chapel, cradled by the forests of Transylvania, where wolves still sing to the void, one such book was found, bound in silence, sealed in wax, hidden behind a wall that should not have hollowed. The villagers never entered the chapel. They walked past it the way one walks past a grave with no name, quietly, quickly, eyes to the path. Built of blackened stone and ivy-throttled spires, the structure stood half swallowed by the forest, hunched like something ashamed to be seen. Its windows were narrow slits, its bell long fallen, its doors sealed by rusted chains. And yet, within its decaying ribs, something waited. The psalter of shadows was discovered by accident. Or perhaps it allowed itself to be found during a quiet renovation meant to stabilize the crumbling nave. A mason's hammer knocked loose a hollow echo behind the altar's back wall. Within that cavity, layered beneath wax so old it flaked like dried skin, lay a single volume wrapped in wolf hide. The hair remained intact, soft, almost warm. They carried it out by candlelight. No one spoke. The book's prayers are not prayers. At all, they are not directed toward heaven, nor whispered to any saint. The ink, scrawled across its brittle pages, twists into shapes resembling Slavic script, but not quite. Some letters resemble Greek, others stretch into unknown curves, mimicking the shape of breath caught mid-scream. Linguists have called it a corruption, theological scholars have called it heresy. But the book does not care what names they give it. It speaks only in supplication, not for salvation, but for escape. Inside there are pages blackened by soot, edges singed as though kissed by fire that still hungers. Some passages are faded to the point of vanishing, as if the words tried to flee the page and could not. Others are so deeply inked they bleed through layers of parchment, a darkness that refuses containment. And in the margins always, the margins there, are drawings. They show monks kneeling, faceless and silent, their mouths sewn shut or absent altogether. Their eyes are wide, always wide, as though fixed on something unseen and approaching. Staircases curl beside them, but none lead upward, always downward, always deeper, into cellars without ends, into pits without light. The order that made this psalter has no recorded name. Their symbols do not appear in any known index. But local legend speaks of a brotherhood once cloaked, not in carsacks, but in wool and ash. They kept no relics, built no monuments. Their worship, if it can be called that, occurred beneath the chapel, in a subterranean sanctum carved with claw and whisper. There, it is said, they listened, not to God, but to something older. something that murmured through the cracks in stone when the world above slept. They did not sing hymns. They hummed a low, tremulous sound like wind curling through the bones of the earth. They fasted until they could no longer speak. Then they wrote, and what they wrote became the Psalter. There is no record of when the chapel fell. No fire was recorded, though its walls are smoke-stained. No plague swept through, though bones have been found buried upright beneath the choir floor, their jaws wrenched open. It is as if the place simply collapsed inward, not in structure, but in soul. Scholars who have studied the Psalter do not speak plainly of it. They mention dreams, vivid, unsettling, persistent, not nightmares, but intrusions. One researcher claimed to wake each night at the same hour, breath caught, heart pounding, convinced someone stood on the other side of her door. Another described the sensation of being watched not from across the room, but from beneath the floorboards. The dreams always follow the same rhythm, a hallway with no end, a door without a handle, a presence that does not move but grows. When they wake, their ears ring not with sound, but with silence so loud it shivers the teeth. One translator attempted to read a section aloud in a locked room. The lights dimmed as if exhaling. The recording equipment failed. When colleagues opened the door, he stood still, the book clutched to his chest, eyes red with broken vessels. He had no memory of what he read, but he wept for 3 days after. When asked why, he could only whisper, "It doesn't want praise. It wants permission." Permission for what? No one dares answer. Fire once touched the Psalter, perhaps in an attempt to destroy it, but only some pages bear the mark. The others seem resistant, almost cold. One section known only as the Descent, prayer shifts. When copied, copyists have found their versions subtly altered, words changing placement, symbols reshaping. One man traced a single glyph 37 times. Each drawing came out differently. He left his post. He is said to live alone now, deep in the Carpathians, where the snow hides the sounds beneath the ground. What lit that fire? Some say it was the order themselves, perhaps, to seal what they had written. Others whisper that something objected to being written at all, and yet the book was sealed, bound in wax, hidden behind stone, not destroyed, preserved, as though some trembling soul within that nameless brotherhood feared not the book's presence, but the world's reaction to its absence. Who do these prayers speak to? What entity crouches between the lines, waiting? The faceless monks drawn in the margins suggest not madness, but reverence. But reverence for what? There is no cross in this Psalter, no saviour, only depth, only eyes, only staircases that descend without bottom. Perhaps there are truths, too old to be sacred, too ancient to be forgiven. Perhaps some forms of faith do not seek the light, but offer shelter to the dark. And in that dark, they do not plead for peace. They plead for quiet. They plead not to be heard. The Psalter of Shadows rests now in a sealed chamber, its wax reapplied, its wolf-hide cover never opened by human hand again. But those who stood near it say the air hums, low and steady, like a voice waiting for its mouth to return. Not all prayers rise. Some fall, and some, once spoken, never stop echoing. Sleep lightly where shadows once sang, beneath the marble bones of Rome, far beneath the pilgrim's feet and the humming candles of the basilica. There lies a chamber no one speaks of, not in sermons, nor in song. It has no name. The air there is old and tastes of iron and extinguished frankincense, and the walls weep with age. If you press your ear to the stone, they say you can hear breathing slow, careful, as if something inside is listening just as intently as you are. There, in a vault, lined not with gold, but with silence, sits a box, not gilded, not blessed, just wood, blackened by time. Locked inside that vault lies a collection that never should have existed. The letters from the black vault were never meant to be read, not by men, not by the faithful, not even by the damned. Bound in a bundle with red thread, their edges curled like old wounds. They were discovered by accident. You believe in accidents by an archivist whose name has already slipped from all official records. He was searching for baptismal documents, lost in a fire 300 years earlier. Instead, he found a false panel behind a crumbling cabinet, and behind it, a vault carved not by masons, but gouged, it seemed, as if by fingers desperate to bury something too dangerous to burn. The letters bore no seals, no marks of official hands. Only a single word was written where the address should be. Him, not a name, not a title. Just that, as if the writer knew whoever received it would know. The parchment was neither papyrus nor vellum. It was fibrous, grey, and strangely soft, like the inside of a mouth. The ink had a scent, faint and persistent, like something both holy and rotting. Myrrh, perhaps, or a corpse washed in wine. Each letter bore a different name, some signed by priests no longer alive, others by bishops long buried. One bore the name of a man who had been excommunicated and declared anathema for claiming he had conversed with the archangel Uriel, and that Uriel had wept. But these were not prayers. These were not confessions. They were conversations, ongoing and intimate, as if the letters had been sent out and answered. No replies were ever found, at least not among the parchment. But some of the pages bore Adishan's words, not in the same hand, in a script that seemed to shimmer and warp beneath candlelight. A cipher, the archivist noted, composed of characters from no known language, shapes that curled inward, recursive, almost as if they were swallowing themselves. Scholars brought in to decipher the language found fragments that echoed Hebrew psalms, shadows of Latin absolutions, and something older even than script. Something whispered. In 1973, a translator from Prague spent a single night with the bundle. By morning, he was gone. His apartment was found abandoned, the windows thrown wide open despite a winter storm, and the carpet soaked in something sticky and black that never dried. Another linguist, brought in a year later, lasted 3 weeks before he was found in the catacombs below San Clemente, wandering in circles, whispering syllables no one could recognize. His eyes were gone, not cut, not torn, gone as if he had given them up willingly, or they had turned to smoke. The Vatican would not speak of the vault again. The archivist who first uncovered it was quietly reassigned. He lived 3 more years, never speaking again, not a word, not even to his wife. His last journal entry, written in Latin, read only, "I heard the reply." One letter, preserved most clearly of all, tells of a dream. The writer, a cardinal whose name has since been erased from all records, speaks of a chambermaid entirely, of keys, millions of them, hanging like icicles from a ceiling he could not see. He was there to unlock one door, only one, but each key he touched screamed in his hand, and in the center of the room stood a figure robed in ash, mouthless, watching, waiting. What was the key meant to open? And if that door was unlocked, what came through? Scholars now say The letters were likely an elaborate forgery, a spiritual allegory, a test for temptation. But if you ask those who've glimpsed the ink, who've smelled the paper, they'll tell you different. They'll tell you the words breathe. That when the bundle is unwrapped, the room grows colder. That you feel a presence behind you, not moving, just waiting to be read. Because the letters were not just written to him, they were written with him. What hand could hold the quill that penned them? What voice echoed in the writer's mind as he scrawled? Some believe the letters were never meant for earthly eyes at all. That the vault was not a hiding place, but a prison. That the words on those pages, those untranslatable ciphers are not language, but chains. Words so dark, so ancient, that to speak them aloud would be to peel back a layer of the world not meant to be touched. Even now, in the deepest hours of the Roman night, when the bells have ceased and only the wind wanders through the cloisters, archivists say the vault breathes, that sometimes, beneath the silence, a page turns of its own accord. A whisper curls along the stone. No one opens the bundle anymore, not without permission. And permission, they say, is never given, because the letters are still there, waiting, quiet, as if they know the world will, one day, try again, and maybe this time, he will answer. They pulled it from the belly of the sea like a forgotten curse, dredged from the mud-clogged ribs of a sunken Ottoman merchant ship just off the coast of Crete. The divers who found it claimed there was no light in that pocket, of water-only silt, slow pressure, and something watching. Inside a rust-flecked tin chest, wrapped in the wet skin of time, lay a book. Not warped, not ruined, not even damp, dry, warm, some said, as if it had never truly belonged to the sea. Its pages were unlike any known to Manthin as breath, flexible, as silk, yet sharp-edged, like old leaves in autumn. Not parchment, not paper. They were made of something that whispered when turned, as if resisting being touched. The script written upon them resembled Arabic at first glance, but the moment one tried to sound it out, the letters curled inward like insects folding in death. It didn't move, but it changed, fluid and defiant. One scholar described it as language in motion. Another called it a script that does not wish to be known. The book had no title on the cover, no name of author, no illumination or embellishment, no clear origin, but within its first few pages, in a tone at once reverent and damning, the book spoke of Himth, green prophet, a figure of such silence that even his name had never been spoken aloud. His followers, it said, never heard his voice. They only read his visions, passed down through gestures, symbols, scratches in dust, and messages etched in the bark of olive trees. His words could not be heard not because they were forbidden, but because the act of voicing them dissolved the meaning entirely. He was a prophet of the unwritten world. It was said that entire cities fell silent at his arrival. Marketplaces grew still. Crows ceased their calls. Mothers wept without sound. Wherever he walked, the clamour of life softened like snow falling on steel. And in that silence, his words bloomed lines of insight and torment recorded feverishly. On walls, into sand, into skin. Monks sewed verses beneath their tongues. Hermits carved them into their ribs. Kings ordered scribes to chisel his messages into pillars, and then ordered those pillars buried. For the green prophet did not offer salvation or warning. He offered only visions, dreams thick with metaphor, labyrinthine and irreversible, of cities suspended by vines, of bridges that wept blood when crossed, of children born with glass for bones and faces turned always east. There were predictions of floods without rain, wars without enemies, awakenings that felt like drowning. No judgment, no commands. Only the green tide of symbols washing over reason like moss over stone. What made the book infamous, however, was not just its contents, but its curse. Or so the whispers claim. Of the 6 men who handled it after its unearthing in 1879, 5 died within months. One, a linguist from Marseille, was found naked in a monastery well, having etched passages onto the inside of the bucket with his fingernails. Another took to speaking backwards in his sleep, and never woke again. The Cairo professor, who attempted to catalogue the book's language, managed to translate just 1 page before abandoning the project altogether. His final diary entry, scribbled in a broken, left-handed scrawl, read simply, "I saw my own name," written backward in green. The book now lies untouched in a sealed cedar box within the Cairo Manuscript Archive. The box is bolted closed with 3 brass locks and sits inside a steel crate engraved with verses from the Quran. No one has asked to open it in decades. It's said that even the curator avoids the room it's stored in, citing headaches and the scent of old jasmine that lingers behind the doors. No flowers are allowed in the building, and yet the scent persists sweeter some days, rancid on others, and the smell, too, of blood. Not fresh, not wet, the dry iron scent of memory. Those who studied the book's early excerpts noted that the ink bled when looked at too long, as if weeping, as if aware. A scholar once held a magnifying lens to a section of the text, and claimed to see just briefly a reflection that wasn't his own. A man without a face, not featureless, just unreadable, like a word blurred just out of focus. That same scholar burned every note he'd taken and vanished into the Sinai. No copies of the book exist. None have ever been successfully photographed. And those who tried to sketch the pages by hand reported nausea and a sensation of being watched through paper, a trembling in the fingertips, a coldness behind the eyes, and always, in the days after dreams, silent, vivid dreams, of gardens, overgrown with teeth, of writing that moved like water, of a prophet standing at the edge of the world, his robes trailing green leaves behind him, where language died and silence began. Some believe the green prophet was not a man at all but a moment in time, a rupture in the script of history. Others say he was a visitor from a forgotten civilization, one that communicated only through dream and symbol. Still others insist he was merely mad, a poet turned hermit, a hallucination made flesh. But no theory explains the book's resistance to study, or the silent awe that overcomes those who so much as glimpse its box from afar. The seas where it was found are calm now, but fishermen report strange tides, and the wreck where the book lay, it has since vanished, as if the ship never existed at all. There is a theory half-whispered by archivists and dismissed by scholars, that the Book of the Green Prophet is not a book at all, but a mirror, that it reflects back something old, buried deep in the human mind, waiting to be read, and that what it shows is not prophecy but memory of a world that once was, or will be again. In the Cairo archive, the cedar box waits, the locks hold, the jasmine scent lingers in the dark like a prayer, too dangerous to speak aloud, and still. No one dares to read it twice. At the far edge of silence, where shadow touches stone, there is a room that no longer exists on any map. A single beam of moonlight once found it through a slit in the ceiling, just enough light to silver the corners of a narrow bed. A wooden cross, and a book wrapped in linen, bound so tightly it looked as though it had been gagged. The cell belonged to a woman who spoke no words, not even in dreams. And when she died, in the year the sky turned, RED 1666, what she left behind whispered of lullabies that were never meant to be sung. They found her at matins, kneeling as if in prayer, though her bones had long since stiffened, and her lips curled upward in a smile no one could explain. Her hands were folded neatly over the codex, as though she was still listening. The other sisters said she had never spoken a syllable, not once, not even in pain or in praise. And yet her journal, when unwrapped from the linen, opened into a world of music, not melody as men understand it, but something more sacred, more alien, a geometry of sound etched into vellum, in ink dark as dried violets. The pages did not rustle. They breathed. The music was written in a notation that shifted under the eye bars that bent like branches, notes shaped like teardrops and seeds, some smeared like the silhouettes of moths. Glyphs accompanied them, strange marks resembling eyes, wombs, and crescents. The more one stared, the less one could remember of what had been seen. The lines twisted in memory. The meaning receded like footprints in a tide. And yet it was beautiful. So terribly beautiful, the sisters brought it to the mother abbess, who refused to touch it. She crossed herself 3 times and ordered it sealed. But even through locked doors, the book made its presence known. Candles flickered in empty chapels. The bell rang once at midnight, though no hand pulled the rope. Infants in the village cried in unison, then fell silent, as if listening. It was not until decades later, when the abbey fell into disuse and its cellars were cleared, that the book resurfaced. It passed quietly from hand to hand each new custodian, believing they could decipher the music, each whispering that they had nearly understood. A priest tried humming the first line. He bled from his ears. A musicologist in Florence claimed to hear entire chords rise from the pages, as if they had been waiting for someone to ask. That night, his neighbors found him lying perfectly still, eyes open, smile frozen, his hand outstretched toward the book, as if he had only just begun to reach. The pages grew heavier with time, as though memory itself had seeped into the parchment. The ink smelled faintly of myrrh, and something sweeter, something like honey or blood. A few said it reminded them of childhood dreams, the ones you forget upon waking but feel in your bones for days. Only one man tried to translate it in full. A composer in Vienna, young, brilliant, and already slipping into madness. He worked by candlelight, tracing the shapes with trembling fingers, murmuring as he wrote. "It's not music," he said once to his apprentice. "It's something that comes before music, like breath before a cry." He played the first few bars on a harpsichord only once. That night he died in his sleep, lips curved in ecstasy, hands gently folded. The apprentice said the air in the room had smelled like wet earth and lilies. No marks on his body, no wound, no poison, just a stillness that clung like incense. The codex passed again into silence. Some believe it to be the language of angels not, the triumphant golden-winged angels of frescoes, but the old ones, draped in wind and dust, who pass between stars and cradle galaxies. Others say the lullabies were never meant for the living at all, that they were songs meant for children, who were never born or who died too early to learn speech. Music for the in-between, for those not yet or no longer here. A researcher once opened the book inside a soundproof chamber in a Cairo archive. He wore gloves. He did not try to read the notes aloud. Still, as he turned the pages, the room grew thick. The air turned syrupy, humming faintly with a sound he could not name, neither song nor silence, but something between. A weight pressed into his chest. He swore he heard a woman humming just behind the glass, though the room had been locked. He closed the codex. The humming stopped, but it never left him. For weeks afterward, he dreamed of dark hallways and silver-eyed infants. His heartbeat echoed like a lullaby in his ears. Eventually, he left the archive. No one knows where he went, only that his final letter bore 7 eyes inked in violet, arranged in a circle, and still the book remained sealed. Vellum yellowed, music unread, dust soft upon its spine like ash from a long-dead fire. No one has dared to sing it in full. Perhaps no one ever should. There are lullabies for comfort, and there are lullabies to carry the soul into darkness. Some doors were not meant to open, some songs not meant to be sung, not because they are cursed, but because they are too kind, too old, too true, and to hear them would be to remember what the world has tried so long to forget. And maybe that's the mercy dot in the monastery of cloistered pines, where snow never fully melts and silence hangs like a veil from the boughs of ancient fir. There is a single window made of green glass that overlooks nothing. No village, no road, no bell tower, just forest, dark and unbroken. This is the window through which the monk was last seen, kneeling with his back to the world, writing by the light of a candle that refused to flicker. They called it Pudlavus, though even that name has vanished from most tongues. The monastery is stone, thick-walled, hunched low against the wind like an animal that knows what hunts it. The corridors echo not with footsteps, but with breaths, whispered prayers, the scrape of parchment. Time itself seems wary of passing there, and on a table in its coldest chamber lies the codex, skin-bound, towering, known to trembling archivists as the Codex Gigas, but in older tongues, and only whispered it, is called the Devil's Margins. They say the monk's name was Herman, or perhaps that was a name given later, when the tale needed telling. He was to be executed for a sin no one remembers. The penalty, to be walled in alive, bricked behind stone, left with bread and water until death embraced him. But he begged for a pardon, not for his soul, but for his hand. He promised a miracle, a book, vast as the sky, that would hold all. Of human knowledge, sacred scripture, natural cures, holy laws, all of it in a single volume, and he would complete it in one night at midnight. The abbot gave him the chance. By candlelight, the monk dipped his quill and began. But as the hours waned, parchment spread like a desert before him, and his ink thinned with desperation. Some say he began to chant in our prayers, but something older than even the Latin on his lips. When dawn crept like pale fire across the stone, the book was finished. And within its middle pages, neither near the beginning nor the end, stood a portrait in full colour, the devil himself, horned, clawed, smiling faintly, alone and flanking him. Nothing, no verses, no saints, no story, just empty space, as though the book itself paused to bow. What no one noticed at first were the margins at the very edges of the pages, where even time forgets to look. There appeared words, whispers, in red, a faint script, too fine for the scribal hand. No ink known to alchemy matches its hue. It has never faded. It bleeds softly, like wine on cloth. The characters do not belong to any language that scholars have dared to name. But when light touches the codex at dusk, they shimmer ever so slightly, as though still wet. Some say the monk did not write them. that they appeared slowly, over years. Others say he never stopped writing, that his hand, lost to death, continued in silence, dragging across vellum in the dark. The margins do not translate, at least not all at once. A linguist once spent 40 nights in the monastery, tracing the red script by lamplight. On the 41st night, he stopped speaking entirely. When they found him, his tongue had been cut from his mouth. No blood, no blade, just a smile drawn in red ink on the wall behind him, and the words, "He speaks now only with silence." A musician once claimed the script was music, that each stroke hummed when viewed from a mirror. He tuned his harp to the margins, playing at dusk. The windows shattered. Birds fell from the sky. He never played again. A nun once visited, blind from birth. When she touched the codex, her eyes filled with tears, not because she saw she did not, but because, as she said, the margins sang to her. "It is a lullaby," she whispered, "but it is not for the living." And still, the codex remains whole, no page missing, no ink smeared. Its portrait of the devil does not crack with age. His eyes glint beneath dust, and his smile endures like something waiting to be understood. In the quiet hours of night, candles near the codex gutter as though breath touches them. The margins hum faintly, not aloud, but beneath the ribs, where fear stirs first. Some archivists insist they've seen new marks appear, slow as sleep, letters curled like snakes, circles like weeping eyes. No one reads it twice, no one reads it twice, no one reads it aloud. Those who do are often found still, eyes wide, fingers locked mid-turn of the page. Some claim to hear murmurs from the margins, not words, not voices, just a warmth that gathers behind the heart, like a hand pressing gently from inside the chest. The devil's portrait is no threat. It does not snarl or scream. It waits, flanked by silence, by a pause as deliberate as breath held in fear. And what of the monk? They say he died shortly after the book was complete. Or perhaps he still lives, not in flesh, but in vellum and red. The margins may be his breath, the codex his prison, or worse, his choir. When lightning strikes near the monastery, archivists swear the margins glow, that ink pulses, that something shifts just beneath the page, like a ripple in pond water touched by wind. And what is it that haunts the soul, if not the things we are told not to see, not to read, not to say? The codex remains sealed in glass now, locked behind walls that no longer echo with prayer. Visitors stare, whisper, move on, but a few linger. Their hands twitch, their eyes water. They do not know why, perhaps. They are the ones the margins choose, for it is not what we read aloud that curses us. It is what we read in silence, and some silences do not end. The wind that wanders Heptapolis tastes of salt and ash. It does not howl its sighs, as the exhaling secrets too heavy to keep, but too dangerous to speak. Beneath the bleached skeletons of columns, among the shattered altars and faceless statues, something ancient stirs, not in movement, but in memory. At dusk, when the ruins glow with the pale violet of dying light, you can hear it, a whisper that does not ride the air, but presses through the stones themselves. The ruins are not silent, they are merely waiting. No maps mark the lost city of Heptapolis anymore. Its bones lie sunken deep in North African dust, beyond the reach of roads, beyond even the curiosity of time. Once, it is said, its walls sang with copper bells, and its libraries burned incense to appease the gods of knowledge. But fire swallowed it whole, fire, or perhaps something older. No living soul remembered its name until the scrolls were found. 7. Of them, bound in scorched linen and bone, unearthed not by accident, but as if led by some forgotten hand. The archaeologists who arrived at the broken plateau thought they came for pottery shards and burial mounds. They left with eyes hollowed by something they could not name, because the scrolls were wrong. Each was curled inward like a fossilized fern, the script flowing in spirals, not lines. Ink that should have faded still shimmered faintly, never in sunlight, but beneath moonlight it breathed like coal. The language was madness incarnate, not Greek, not Punic, not Berber nor Latin. Glyphs twisted into themselves. Some formed mouths, others resembled birds devouring stars. The first translator bled from the nose. The second, a woman fluent in 6 dead tongues, began weeping as she read, her lips forming words she swore she did not know. When asked what it meant, she could only whisper, "It knows we're listening." One scroll spoke of cities made of mirrors, where no reflection matched its source. Another described a silver child born without a face, whose birth would silence the sun. The fifth told of a door hidden beneath the sea, a door that was not built, but dreamed. When the 6th was read aloud near the southern cliffs, dogs in the valley below began to bark in unison, then stopped as if struck mute. Wind rose, not from sky, but from stone. Stones do not exhale, and yet something did. What little consensus was drawn from the spiral texts was fragmented at best. No 2 translations agreed. Some scholars saw maps, others riddles. A few claimed the scrolls were prayers. One man, pale as death, insisted they were warnings, and left the team without another word he never published again. What remains are threads, distinct syllables, that unspool only when the reader is alone and the room is still and the air feels strangely thick. One passage reoccurs, always at the center of the spiral, where the sky fell in 3 parts. The end will begin. Some interpret it as prophecy, others as history already buried. The scrolls mention a city drowned in air, and another that vanished not in flood, but in memory. A word repeated often, verulam, cannot be placed in any language, but every reader senses something beneath it, a weight, a shadow, and theirs. The smell, not of age, not parchment or dust, but something sweet, rotting, like lilies laid too long on a sealed tomb. The scrolls carry it wherever they go, even sealed in lead cases, even across oceans. And always, always that odd humming sound, not quite a tone, but the suggestion of one like a lullaby remembered from a dream, or a name you've almost forgotten, but can't quite release. After the 7th scroll was opened, something changed in the ruins. The winds grew stranger, electronics faltered. One camera captured static shaped like eyes. The team's lead historian began waking each night at 3:07, claiming to hear a voice repeating the same sentence over and over. "It waits where you buried it." They had buried nothing. Then came the fire. The camp, built well beyond the perimeter of the dig site, caught flame in the middle of a windless night. No source, no trail, just fire, blooming from nothing, like a secret finally exhaled. No one was harmed, but the flames had licked close, very close to the tent where the scrolls had been stored. And yet the linen was untouched. The bone bindings gleamed. One archaeologist, a woman named Alira, began to dream of a man made of sand, whose chest was a hollow window filled with stars. In her dream, He held the scrolls to the sky and whispered, "These are not written to be read. They are meant to remember you." She never returned to the site. She burned her notes and left a single phrase behind, etched into her cabin wall. The ink listens, and still the scrolls remain, moved, catalogued, but never understood. Their words are not dead, only dormant. The ink changes, very slightly, with each new moon. A line lengthens, a curve bends. Once, a marginal dot a dot disappeared entirely. These are not static texts. They evolve, or they notice. Perhaps the scrolls do not tell us anything. Perhaps they wait for us to say the right name aloud, and only then will they begin to speak. Maybe they were not written for us at all, but for what came before and what will come again. And so they sit, sealed and silenced, yet somehow more alive than any book has the right to be. Inside their spirals lie cities that have never stood and wars that will never be remembered. Inside their spirals lies a lullaby that ends the moment you try to sing it. On certain nights, if you sit near the edge of the Heptapolis ruins, the moon hangs low and the stones still breathe, you might hear it. A faint scratching, like a pen moving without hand or ink, writing not new words, but rewriting the ones we thought we understood, rewriting us, and in the space between those spirals, in the silence they demand, the question lingers, not whether the scrolls can be translated, but whether they should be, because some knowledge doesn't destroy when revealed. It waits, quietly, lovingly, until you begin to understand. The smoke rose before the fire, and the fire came before the silence, somewhere in the folds of time where centuries sleep behind crumbling stone and ivor-stained altar walls. There is a monastery that does not appear on any modern map. It lies near Lyon, or so the locals whisper, hidden in the soft breath of the hills, veiled by forest mist and memories too ancient to be trusted. It was here, beneath a chapel that had long since collapsed into moss and ruin, that a single codex was found, burnt at the corners, its leather cover warped like flesh boiled too long. The parchment within still warm to the touch. They called it the Gospel of Smoke. No one knows who placed it there, or how long it had waited beneath the stone. But something about it felt old, not merely in age, but in essence, as if the book had been written not after time began, but before it fully understood how to walk. The script curled like incense rising, thin, and black and wrong in its rhythm. It danced across each page as though the letters might unravel if you stared too long, and the words, it is said, they do not speak of salvation, or divinity, or even damnation. Only of smoke, of glass, of silence, parables without names, lessons without teachers, warnings, perhaps, from a God no longer interested in being known. The first to open it was a friar, whose name has not survived the centuries. He found it while clearing debris from beneath a scorched archway where the ground had collapsed into a crypt. The book was untouched by water, untouched by dust, but his hands trembled as he lifted it, not from awe, nor from fear, but something deeper, like a recognition, as though the book had been waiting not for anyone, but for him. He brought it to his candlelit chamber. That night, the abbey dogs howled without pause. The wind rose, though the stars remained still, and the friar, hunched over the first page, began to copy its script by hand onto a fresh sheaf of vellum. By morning, he was found in the chapel. The page he had copied lay before him, smeared in blood. His tongue torn from his mouth had been placed neatly beside the candle he had used to write. No one ever saw him write again, There are illustrations in the Gospel of Smoke, scattered between the curling text like hauntings between hymns. A man with a mirror where his face should be, holding his own reflection and weeping. A city suspended above a black ocean, its foundations made of chained birds, beasts with mouths sewn shut, their eyes filled with stars. One figure appears, over and over again, a veiled woman made entirely of ash, her hands reaching but never touching. She walks in and out of the pages, as though she too is searching. No language scholar has ever agreed on the translation of the Gospel. Some claim it to be a hallucination written down. Others insist it was meant only to be seen, not read. A few believe it to be a message written for something not humana. Language meant not for the mouth, but for the memory. When read aloud, the wind changes. Candles sputter, even if protected by glass. One monk who tried to translate the text described it as a prayer written in reversement to unmake, not to bless. Soon after, he too vanished. The abbey burned shortly after the book was found, not once, but twice. First a lightning strike, then a fire with no known cause, and each time the Gospel of Smoke was pulled from the ashes charred, but never consumed. By the third fire, the remaining monks boarded up the ruins and fled. Those who returned found the book gone. Some claimed it had been stolen. Others whispered that it had returned to wherever it came from, but stories continued to rise. Like breath in frost, a traveller who found a single page wrapped in cloth along the rain claimed that after touching it, he could not see his reflection for 3 years. A scholar who translated 3 lines of the Gospel into Latin suffered seizures every time he spoke a lie. And a woman in Geneva was said to have built an altar from the torn fragments lighting candles that never melted, praying to a God whose name she would not speak. No one ever saw her again. What makes the Gospel of Smoke more than myth, more than fire-lit fear, is that it is not entirely gone. Somewhere a page exists in a museum archive in Prague, mislabeled and misfiled. It smells of sulphur and pine. The ink glows faintly under moonlight, though no chemical explains why. The page reads, simply, "You are not the reader, you are the remembered," and perhaps that is what the book always was, not a gospel to be understood, but one to be obeyed. A commandment for a future that should never come. A warning written in symbols that echo from forgotten stars. The last man to claim ownership of the codex lived in the High Pyrenees. He was a collector of rare books, reclusive and stern. One day, his staff found his study empty, the fire still, warm, no signs of forced entry, only his slippers near the door. And above the hearth, carved in soot, were 3 mirrored figures and a single word, return. No one knows what it meant, and perhaps that is the cruelest mystery, that we are told the story not to solve it, but to carry it, that we are not readers of this gospel, but pages within it, bound by its fire, stitched with its silence. So now we close the book not with answers, but with ash on our breath. Somewhere a candle guttered. Somewhere the wind stirs through a broken chapel window. And somewhere, in a language older than stone, a gospel continues to write itself, in smoke, in glass, in silence. Beneath the black glass surface of the northern sea, where no songs are sung and the sun dies early, something stirs in silence. It was not meant to be found. The diary was wrapped in skins and sealed inside a chest of carved driftwood, itself hidden in the rotted hull of a Viking ship, a grave, swallowed by Greenland's frozen coast. No one had searched for it. No one had called its name. Yet when the earth cracked open after a sudden thaw, it rose not like a resurrection, but like a wound that refused to stay closed. The ship had once cut through waters like a blade through meat, heavy with warriors, oaths, and iron dreams. But the vessel they uncovered bore no shields, no swords, no remnants of conquest, only bones, weathered, small. One skull, carefully wrapped in furs, rested beside the box, and the box, untouched by rot or time, held the diary of the drowned scribe. The script within does not sit still. The letters seem carved rather than written, angry, looping strokes that tangle like seaweed. Half Old Norse, half something older, something raw and alien, like the ice itself had tried to speak. Yet the scribe's voice drips through, word by word, line by trembling line. He begins as a man, a simple recorder of trade and tide, sent to chart stars, to track days, to preserve memory. But he does not remain a man. Something happens, something ancient and wet and whispering. He writes of the journey north, not out of duty, but devotion. Not to a king or a god, but to a star that sang. It would rise not with the rest, but late silver and violet, pulsing to a rhythm no human could follow. The others did not hear it. He writes, only he. Each night it called, humming through frostbitten dreams, louder than prayer, clearer than command. The crew grew restless. The maps grew wrong. Ice shifted as though alive. Islands moved, disappeared, returned upside down. The sun split in two. Then the birds fell from the sky, and the sea boiled with light. He began to draw. Pages filled with diagrams of music, arcs and loops and spirals carved into flesh-colored parchment. He drew a creature with no head, only mouths 13 of them. He drew a woman made of frost with eyes like still water. He drew a tower beneath the ocean, and a hand reaching from its base to cradle the moon. Then came the voices, not from the crew who now whispered behind him, afraid, but from the ice below, cracking, groaning, breathing. He pressed his ear to the wood of the hull. It spoke back. There was a night never named, only called the turning. He does not mark the date. He only draws a circle, broken at one point. That night, he says, the wind stopped. Utter stillness. The sea became a mirror, and the star, the singing one, fell. It did not burn, it did not scream. It lowered slowly, like a god sitting among men, and from the place where it touched the water came them, the things. He never names them, only sketches. Shadows with antlers. Eyes that looked in 3 directions at once. Limbs too many and too jointless. Shapes that changed depending on whether you watched or blinked. The crew vanished, one by one, not taken, erased. He remained. He stayed. Why, he does not explain. Perhaps he was chosen, or perhaps he had nowhere else to go. He says the ocean became a ceiling, that he walked downward through the air, that the stars above became sand, that time bled sideways. He found a temple beneath the sea, or perhaps he made it. Its walls were made of bone and salt and humming. There were glyphs there, he writes, matching those in his dreams. A door waited, black, rimmed with gold, too bright to look at, and through it the song he says he nearly stepped through. But then something touched his foot cold, soft, childlike. A hand. The diary's ink begins to blur here. Smudges, pressure scars, the erratic pulse of a man too close to something final. The letters tilt, the lines spiral, pages weep salt. He writes upside down, he repeats a phrase. I remembered my name. He had not written it before. Not once. In the last pages, the language fractures into pure rune shapes, not seen in any known tradition. Violent loops, twisted thorns, jagged teeth like staves. No translator agrees on their meaning. One says they are screams. Another says they are a prayer. A third says it is neither, only music, written down don't, then silence. No final line, only the drawing. A door open wide, waves pour through like fingers. On the threshold stands a man, faceless, boneless, kneeling, and behind the door, only dark. The diary ends here. It is gone now. Taken from its case in the Reykjavik archives 2 winters ago. No signs of entry, only a puddle of seawater where it had been. No salt, just brine, cold enough to burn, and the star, the one that sang. Some say it has returned. It hangs over the North Sea on certain moonless nights. Fishermen have drowned reaching for it. Satellites pass by and glitch. And in Greenland, on the edge of the thaw, strange music echoes through the melting ice, low, metallic, sorrowful. Not everyone hears it, but some do, and some follow, in the winter deep cellar of what once was. Buddha's proud heart where kings prayed, bled, and vanished beneath stone, there lay a reliquary untouched by centuries. It was not found by design, but by collapse. A section of ancient floor gave way, groaning beneath the weight of time, and the earth exhaled dust that hadn't breathed in 500 years. Lanterns were lowered by rope, their flames flickering as though warning of what slept below, and there, nestled like a secret beneath the bones of the castles past, was a box not of wood nor iron, but of some mineral so dark it drank in light. Within it, wrapped in cloth embroidered with gold thread as fine as spider silk, was the scroll. It had no name, no signature, no markings of kings or scribes. Just a spiral of symbols, thin, deliberate, etched so finely into the vellum they seemed almost to float, untouched by time. From the first glance, it resisted understanding. The writing did not move left to right or top to bottom. It coiled, like smoke caught in amber, or the fossil of something once living, now whispering its memory through form, under candlelight. The scroll seemed to breathe. They called it a chronicle, though it told no story anyone could read. Some claimed it was a death ledger, an account of all who had perished in the long-forgotten wars that soaked Hungary in sorrow. Others whispered of alchemists who bound their knowledge in curses, symbols placed so the mind would shatter before meaning could be found. But it refused all attempts at translation. No ink on earth matched its shimmer, not gall, not coal, not crushed beetle nor burned bone. When flame touched its surface, it did not char. When water met it, the drops rolled away, untouched. And when silence fell over it, one might hear something faint, a hum, or was it the pulse of the reader's own fear? In life, it may have belonged to someone who understood things the rest of us do not. A chronicler not of kings, but of something. Deeper, something older than language. Perhaps he had no face. Perhaps he wore a mask of gold and ash and wandered the ruins long before they fell. And perhaps he is still watching. The labyrinth carved into the scroll pulled those who studied it into obsession. One scholar, a priest who had once translated the Book of Revelation into 8 tongues, locked himself away with the scroll for 40 days. When they broke the door down, he was found murmuring to the stone wall, having stitched a spiral into his own skin with quill and thread. He lived, but never wrote again. Another researcher, a woman named Erzsébet, who specialized in ancient European cartography, declared the scroll to be not writing, but a map. She claimed the spiral was not metaphor, but geography impossible. Land curled in on itself, whose borders only shifted when looked upon. She traced its patterns into sand, walked barefoot through her home in the same sequence over and over. On the night she vanished, her neighbors swore they heard the sound of waves. Though Buddha stands far from the sea, that some say the chronicle does not want to be read, that it is not a book, but a prison, a place where something once written was locked away not in text, but in form, that to read it is to walk a corridor of bones, and to reach its center is to disappear. Others say it is the final record of a forgotten king, the last of a Hungarian dynasty whose name has been erased, not by conquest, but by time's own will. A ruler who sought to undo history, to rewind the years like thread pulled through a needle, and in doing so, wrote his life backward. The spiral, they say, is his mind unraveling. The glowing ink is his blood, mixed with mercury and starlight. The gold cloth that wraps it was the shroud he wore into death. There is no date on the scroll, no beginning, no end. When spread across the table of an old chapel, candlelight pooling in pools of melted wax, the symbols cast shadows that stretch longer than their shape. One monk swore he saw the bones of a beast etched in negative, the ribs, the spine, the tail, as though the scroll were not written, but grown, as though it had been carved not by hand, but by memory. In the silence of the archives, when the doors are shut and the stone begins to creak with cold, the scroll hums faintly. Not a sound made by any living thing, but a breath, perhaps, or the echo of a name once spoken beneath the earth. What frightened even the boldest scholars was not its mystery, but its intimacy. It felt as though the scroll knew them, as if each eye that gazed upon its form was reflected within it, as though behind the spiral something watched back. There were those who spoke of dreams, of standing in a vast cathedral with no ceiling, beneath a sky turning slowly inside out, of hearing bells ring in reverse, of following a trail of ribs down a staircase that bled with each step. One man awoke to find his mouth full of sand. Another found he could no longer speak in straight lines. His sentences looped and folded, his tongue tangled in echoes. The last person to touch the scroll with bare hands was an old conservator, named Imre. He unwrapped it once more, gazed into its spiral, and whispered, "We were never meant to read it forward." No one knows what he meant. He vanished 3 days later, his notes unreadable, composed entirely of circles. The scroll now lies in a sealed vault, beneath 5 locks, behind 3 doors, but even sealed away, it waits. And sometimes when the wind moves through the cracks in the old castle stones, some swear they hear the parchment shift, as though curling deeper inward, as though the story it holds is still being written. Perhaps the scroll is not a chronicle of the past, but a prophecy told backward. Perhaps it was never written to be read by us. Perhaps it was never written at all, and so it sleeps, wrapped in gold, beneath the weight of Buddha's fallen throne, a coil of memory, of time folded upon itself, and somewhere deep within its spiral, the end still breathes in the crumbling shadows beneath the old basilica, where salt air from the Aegean whispers through broken stone. The codex lay waiting. The floor above had long since given way to dust, and ivy, candles no longer burned in the alcoves. The choir's echo, once sweet with psalms, now drifted as a mournful sigh through catacombs sealed by centuries. Rats ran like ghosts. The tiles mosaics of saints with hollow eyes cracked beneath time's indifferent weight. And beneath it all, beneath the silence and the rot, hidden under a forgotten altar lined in flaking gold, there was a vault. Salt had stained its locks. Iron had wept rust. But still it held. It was not found by priests or pilgrims, but by a mason hired to stabilize a wall that no longer wished to stand. His chisel struck stone that echoed too sharply, hollow, and so they dug not with reverence, but with tired sweat-slicked hands, till the slab gave way to a pocket of air that had not tasted breath in centuries. The vault was colder than the sea, bone-chill cold, death cold. The walls were damp and veined with veins of salt, and there, resting like a heart removed from the world, lay the codex, bound in leather so pale it looked like waxed skin. Its clasp bore no sigil. Its cover had no name, only a whisper of something once burned into it, now vanished as if it recoiled from being known. The ink inside shimmered when disturbed, fading under touch, shifting under candlelight, like it resisted being seen too long. It was as though the book itself remembered the feel of eyes and fled from them. The first to open it spoke little afterward. He was a linguist, a proud man who believed no tongue too ancient for his mind to crack. But when he returned from the vault, he would only say, "It doesn't want to be read. It wants to be understood differently." Then he left the monastery and was never seen again. The codex bore no page numbers, no chapters. Its words were not words, but shape swirls, triangles, spirals within spirals. Each sentence curved like a path around a whirlpool. The more one tried to follow, the more one lost themselves. Mirrors seemed to flicker in the margins. Some pages bled into others, like oil into water. To look at it too long was to feel one's mind rippled, and yet beneath the abstraction there were visions. They were felt more than read, mournful, strange, half-sung in the mind like memories not your own. They told of towers cracking in rain long before storms ever arrived, of kings who bled to death in gardens not yet planted, of cities that would burn and did, precisely as whispered. The monks who catalogued it began to suspect what the older legends whispered, that it had been written by seers. But not just any seers, an order, nameless now, who dwelled in darkness and silence. They had no symbols, no lineage, only a ritual whispered in broken Greek from some older tongue. It was said they removed their eyes, not in sacrifice, but to see more clearly. They wrote what they saw, not with letters, but with the very shapes of what came, fractals of consequence, geometries of grief. Their prophecies were not sentences, they were clocks, ticking not forward, but inward. One scholar, a young woman whose hands shook, but whose mind burned bright spent, 3 winters tracing the codex's curves. She pinned every spiral to canvas. She matched every pattern to earthquakes, to eclipses, to the births of saints and the deaths of kings. What she found haunted her. Each cluster of glyphs corresponded not to words, but pulses, events, alignments. She became convinced the codex was not static, but counting, not to a date, but to a convergence. And as she worked, she noticed something stranger still. The book was changing. The ink in its center, pages once dormant, began to pulse faintly under moonlight. Glyphs she had not drawn before began to appear in her notes, even though she did not remember adding them. She dreamed of spirals, of blind faces beneath candlelight, hands dripping wax onto vellum, mouths moving in silence. Once, she woke to find a symbol from the codex burned into her palm in ash. She locked herself in the vault, afraid she would forget what she had become. Her last letter, sent in the sleeve of a borrowed monk's robe, read only, "It's almost time, but I don't know what for." When they broke in, she was gone. No blood, no signs of struggle, only the codex, closed, its clasp slightly warm to the touch. To this day, no one knows who the blind seers were. Their names are lost, their rituals forbidden. Only fragments remain, a bone icon, a hymn sung in circles, never ending, never beginning. But the codex remains, and its center continues to darken, spiral inward, as if breathing, waiting. Some believe it marks a moment the world will crack. Others think it's a key to a chamber not yet found. But one thing all who have seen it agree on: it is not a book written in the past. It is a book waiting for the future. And when that moment comes, when the spiral closes, and the shape completes, something old and sightless will awaken. Not with rage, not with joy, but with inevitability. Like a tide, like death, like time, finally arriving at the doorstep it has circled for centuries. So we wait, in silence, in candlelight, listening to the slow turning of a page we cannot read, but which reads us, and the codex of the blind seers waits too, silent, watching without eyes in the highest spires of Sinai, where the air is thin and silence is thicker than stone. There lies a cloistered library that breathes like a tomb. The wind does not howl, her exhales softly, like a penitent kneeling in prayer. And among the brittle shelves and inks, wood, behind a lock that bears no key, rests a page so faint it almost isn't there. It is not bound, nor catalogued, nor spoken of. It is hidden beneath others, buried under the burden of centuries, of desperate prayers and fevered denials. They call it, though never aloud, the palimpsest of whispers. No one knows who first laid ink upon that parchment. It might have been a scribe, or a mystic, or something not quite either. What survives of the page is barely the ghost of a document, thinned calfskin, thinned again, until it is almost translucent. Its topmost script is a Greek liturgy plain, pious, forgettable. It speaks of morning offerings and divine mercy, and no one cares to read it. But tilt the page, let candlelight spill from the side, not above, and there, in veins of faded ink and shadows more felt than seen, older words shimmer to the surface. Syriac prayers curl beneath the Greek. Beneath those Aramaic fragments nestle like bones inside the flesh. And deeper still, far below the prayers and psalms, something coils. Formless and slow, written in a script that does not belong to any known tongue. It is not ink, not quite. It glows faintly when no one watches. Its letters do not sit still. They drift like mist caught in breath, forming and reforming, refusing to be held. Linguists came once, in the spring of a year no monk will now name. They brought microscopes and machines and equations. But after 3 nights in the monastery, they left without a word. One returned to Germany and retired from academia. One entered a silent order and never again spoke. The last simply vanished. His passport was found on a bus seat in Cairo, nothing else. The monks deny this, of course. They claim the palimpsest is but a curiosity old parchment, scraped and reused, as was once common. But they never touch it. They do not move it. They speak of it as one might speak of a sleeping viper curled under floorboards, real but better, unacknowledged. And if a visitor lingers too long in the archives, they are gently guided away, not by command, by silence. Averted eyes, doors that creak shut of their own accord. What does it say beneath the prayers? What thread of thought demanded to be buried so many times and in so many tongues? What voice was too dangerous to erase, yet too terrible to speak? One legend, whispered once by a dying abbot and never again, claimed it was a song, an unfinished song from before language, before breath, before the fall of light. Another says it is a map, not of land, but of forgetting, a guide for those who wish to leave memory behind and walk into the hush beyond time. A third tale, told by no monk but heard in the wind between the mountain stones, says it is not writing at all, but the shadow of something that passed through the parchment, like a hand through water, the echo of a thought too large for any human mind. It is not idle wonder that surrounds the palimpsest, it is fear. For when read, if it can be read at all, it does not speak in words. It arrives instead as images behind the eyes, a city of glass that shatters when named, a child with no face walking into fire, an ocean made of bells tolling in silence. Those who attempt to interpret it speak afterward of impossible dreams, doors in their walls that were not there before, and voices behind them asking to be let in. In 1847, a French Jesuit attempted to transcribe the underlayers using acid and light. His journal, now sealed in the Vatican, ends mid-sentence, the penstroke curling like smoke. The monks found him seated upright, eyes open, hands folded. But his lips were sewn shut with thread made not of silk or sinew, but letters. Letters from the palimpsest itself, branded into flesh. In more recent years, attempts were made using spectral imaging machines, scanning the page from every angle. But the images returned not with script, but with reflections. The faces of those who scanned it, altered slightly, mouths too wide, eyes too many. The project was abandoned. The equipment remains, rusting in the monastery's cellar, untouched. And still the page lies there, breathing quietly, layer upon layer of meaning, erased and written again, as though each age tried to suffocate the one before it, not out of ignorance, but terror, as if the only way to keep the thing asleep was to keep rewriting its lullaby. Perhaps that is the secret of the palimpsest, not a message to be read, but a ritual, a binding, a chorus of forgettings. Every hand that wrote upon it did so not to preserve, but to suppress, not to illuminate, but to bury. And yet, buried things shift in the soil. They do not die. They wait, sometimes, late at night, when the wind dies and the mountain seems to exhale. The monks say they hear scratching, a whisper of parchment against stone, a turning page. But the archive is locked, always locked, isn't it? There is one final story, though even the bravest monks will not speak of it aloud. It is said that the last hand to touch the palimpsest did not belong to any monk or scribe or man, that the script at the bottom, the one that writhes and glows, was not written at all, that it simply appeared one winter morning beneath all the others, as though the parchment, tired of being erased, decided to speak for itself, and so the page waits, fragile, eternal, whispering beneath prayers, buried beneath belief, not dead, not alive, just waiting for someone to turn the light the wrong way, for someone to listen. It was said the Sibyl spoke only in riddles, and only when the earth itself held its breath. Her voice, once heard, was never forgotten, an ache more than a sound, like the moan of wind through mausoleums or the sigh of marble warming in the sun. and in the oldest catacombs beneath Rome, where the bones of the unnamed line tunnels, like mute witnesses, her voice may still hum entombed in ivory, spiral written, waiting. The discovery came at the turning of a century, when belief and skepticism walked side by side like twin shadows under gaslight. In 1902, a party of clerics and scholars descended into the dust-choked galleries beneath the Eternal City, following faint ecclesiastical maps and whispers traded in wind-dark corners of libraries. The chamber they found had not been touched by breath in over 1,000 years, its seal unbroken, its reliquary untouched. It was not a coffin, not exactly, but something older in intent. Within it, wrapped not in silk or linen, but in fragments of scapula and femur, lay the Sibylline codex of bone. Its pages were not parchment, but the thinnest, ivory sliced and polished into wafer-like sheets that smelled faintly of myrrh and the sea. Symbols spiraled inward, like constellations collapsing into themselves. Each line a descent, each verse a gravity well. The pages were warm to the touch. They called it Etruscan at first. The scholars, with their pale knuckles and ink eyes, tried to ground it in something familiar, but no syntax held. The grammar twisted like roots in dry soil, breaking every rule of mortal tongue. Between the stanzas, small etched figures, cloaked and faceless, their eyes replaced by stars, their mouths open as if wailing though no sound would come. There was no author's name, no colophon, no dating, but someone, something had carved it, and whatever hand had done so had been neither rushed nor mortal. Each attempt to reproduce a page ended in failure. Copiers jammed, inks bled like open veins, typewriters skipped as if rejecting the form. A monk who tried to trace the symbols by candlelight found his quill burst at the nib, ink soaking the page and staining his palms black. The stains never faded. He left the order soon after. No one knew where he went. Scholars who stayed too long near the codex began to report strange sensations, a whisper just below hearing, the feeling of being watched from within their own rib cages. One claimed that the codex wept at night, ivory growing slick with a dew that was not water. Another heard a humming, like a lullaby sung in reverse. No one lasted more than 7 nights, but the codex changed. It was subtle at first, a darkening of one page, then another, not with mold or soot, but with ink that was not ink. Symbols that had not been there before began to appear. They coiled inward toward a blank circle in the center of the final page, once empty, now the size of a coin, and filled with faint silver dust, as if waiting for a moon. By the time the Vatican archivists locked the chamber, 3 pages had fully darkened. One scholar vanished entirely. The others retired, silent and grey, unwilling to speak of what they'd read. And yet, fragments of verse remain, etched from memory by those who dared to look. A city of bone beneath the living stone, where shadows drink time and the stars unseam their skins. The eye opens from within the skull, and what it sees shall burn the veil. When the final breath circles thrice, the buried voice will rise in spiral song. Some believe the Codex of Bone is not a prophecy, but a warning. Others call it a clock, wound not by hands, but by silence itself. And still others, fewer now, whisper that it is not a book at all but a being, asleep, dream-bound in spiral verse, feeding on the minds that try to translate it. The spiral, always the spiral, even in the star maps, scratched in faint silver. Beside the verses, constellations twist inward, folding space upon space, suggesting not a place in the sky but a passage, perhaps to a memory, or to something beneath memory, where language fails and only feeling remains in one account. An archivist swore that while reading the codex he could smell salt sea salt, ancient and briny, and beneath that, rot, but not the rot of flesh, the rot of faith, as if something had died long ago and continued to pray anyway. No one has ever read the entire codex. No one has dared. Yet every few years the pages shift. Slowly, patiently, one more darkens, one more breathes, and with each transformation the room grows colder, not in temperature, but in soul, as if some unseen presence is drawing closer, not watching, not yet, but turning, like a face in dreams, almost ready to meet your gaze. A rumor, never verified, tells of a final page sealed behind the others, bound in wax and bone thread. On it, they say, is a single word, not in any human tongue, a name, perhaps, or a command, or the sound of something waking up. What lives in the spiral, what sings through ivory bones, what waits beneath the centuries, behind the veil of languages long buried, scratching its verses into relics no hand can hold. We may never know, or worse, we may someday understand, but until then, the codex rests, dreaming, patient, its words unreadable, but its pull undeniable. And in the silence beneath Rome, in the chill chambers where no breath stirs, it waits for the spiral to complete. Not all books are meant to be read. Some are meant to remember, some are meant to forget, and some are meant to be forgotten. In the city of Prague, where fog wraps itself around lamplight like a jealous lover, and the Vltava flows dark and slow beneath stone bridges, there once lived a woman who spoke only in riddles after sundown. Her windows remained shuttered even in spring. Her hands, pale and long-fingered, were always gloved, even when she took no visitors. They called her the Countess of the Fading Rooms, not because her name was lost, but because something in her home seemed to erase itself with time. Wallpaper peeled without rot, paintings dulled faster than memory, candles extinguished as though air itself rejected light. She lived alone in a manor older than the plague. Beneath its arched ceilings, time didn't pass, it coiled. She was said to write at night, only at night, hunched over a desk carved with an unfamiliar sigillar swirling symbol that no scholar could trace to language or lineage. What she wrote, no one knew. Not her servants, not her priest, not the cousin who brought her oranges once a year, but every morning they found her fingertips stained dark, and every evening her inkwells were empty. Then came the spring of 1784, the year the bells refused to chime on Candlemas, and something in the air became weighted, thicker, quieter. The Countess sent a boy, a mute orphan she had kept as a page, to deliver a red velvet-bound manuscript to the chapel library of St. Agnes. It bore no title, only the swirling sigil, embossed in black wax. The pages, when first examined, shimmered, faintly with ghost-X. Words appeared not in lines, but in scattered fragments, like thoughts interrupted mid-birth. Some sentences curled inward, coiling around illustrations that could not be named. A gate of mirrors, a wingless bird, a girl with 5 shadows. The ink faded within a week, but not all at once. First, the punctuation disappeared. Dots, commas, the slow, rhythmic breathing of a sentence. Then letters dissolved like mist on glass. By the end of April, the pages had gone blank, save for one central folio where faint indentations remained, as if something had scratched the words in haste or fear. The paper bore no cuts, but its fibers seemed disturbed. Scholars brought fire to it, then salt, then blood. Some claimed they saw glyphs rise faintly under candlelight, only to vanish when touched. They named it the ink that vanished, and still it waited. The Countess, growing more fragile with each passing dusk, claimed she did not write it not truly. She said it came to her in sleep, spoken in a language she did not know, but understood. A voice from behind the mirror, she whispered, "It teaches me things I am not meant to keep." Her final night was without moonlight. The servants found her in her study, seated upright in her writing chair, her gloved hands folded neatly, her mouth half-parted in a final breath. No sign of struggle, no sign of peace. The ink was gone from her hands, but the mirror on the wall opposite her descan, old Venetian relic blackened with eye-edge, had cracked down the center, as if something had leaned against it from the other side. In her mouth was a folded slip of paper, blank. The manuscript passed hands after her death, first to the cathedral, then to the Royal Archive, then briefly to a salon of spiritualists who swore they saw writing crawl across the pages like worms across soil. None of them lasted long. One leaped from a balcony. Another took to silence, speaking only in vowels before dying in sleep. A third painted only gates for the rest of her life, mirror gates, silver-edged, always ajar today. The manuscript rests in the Museum of Unexplained Relics in Prague, locked behind triple-paned glass. Under bright museum lights, it appears blank, but sometimes only. Sometimes when the lights dim and footsteps fade, security guards report a shimmer at the page's edge, like breath against old vellum, like ink reconsidering its retreat. Attempts to reproduce it always fail. Printers jam, pens blot, photographs come out blank. A journalist once tried to trace the indentations with graphite. His pencil snapped 3 times in a row. When he returned a month later, he found his notes had been scrubbed clean, his audio tape filled with the sound of steady breathing, not his own. And still, the red velvet binding remains pristine, not faded, not worn, as if time had been told not to touch it. There are those who believe the Countess had tapped into something older than language, older than thought, a river of meaning that flows beneath the waking world, a place where stories are not written but remembered, and memory must be earned. Some call it the dreaming ink, others the mirror's tongue. But the Countess had another name for it. In the final pages of her diary, her true diary, found in a locked drawer beneath her bed, she wrote of a gate, not seen but felt, a place one slips into when the soul is too heavy for the body to hold. She called it the library that remembers you, and she feared it. She wrote, "The words do not vanish. They go where they are needed. They return when you are ready." That was the last thing she wrote before the ink fled her as well. And now the manuscript waits, quiet and whole, like a breath before a scream. Visitors walk past it without pause, without knowing what they do not see. Children glance at it and frown, sensing some absence they cannot name. Once, a little girl pressed her palm against the glass and whispered, "It's humming." Her parents heard nothing in the long hours past midnight, when Prague is quiet and the Vltava flows like melted shadow through the city's heart. Some believe the manuscript still stirs, that its pages breathe like lungs, that the ink has not vanished, but merely waits for someone who can hear the voice behind the mirror and remember the words that were never meant to stay. They say the desert remembers what the world forgets. Long after cities fall and palaces turn to dust. The sand whispers, not in words, but in tremors beneath the wind, in the way silence deepens near certain stones, in the pause between two breaths taken too far apart. And if you travel far enough, to the ruins of a madrasa swallowed by time outside the ancient city of Samarkand, you might hear it too, that strange hush, not absence of sound, but a waiting, a pressure in the air, like something has just stopped speaking and is about to begin again. It was in the spring of 1892 when a team of workers, clearing debris from a collapsed prayer hall, unearthed a bundle, wrapped in dark cloths so tightly knotted that it took them hours to untangle the silken cords. Beneath the layers lay a book unlike any other. No title, no script, just a rectangle of thick, uneven pages, dyed in haunting hues lapis, ochre, soot, and pearl grey. The colours didn't follow any pattern. Some pages were soaked fully in blue, others mottled like bruised skin, and yet none bore even a single word. It was brought to the scholars at the Ulubeg Library. They too were baffled. Under candlelight, the book shimmered faintly, as if layered in breath. When opened, the pages were warm to the touch. But more than that, they seemed to thrum, not with sound, not with movement, but with sensation, a strange, inner vibration like a whispered note held between two dimensions. One of the younger apprentices, the son of a spice seller, claimed that when he pressed his fingers to one of the darker pages, he tasted ash. Another reported the scent of rosewater and iron. One elder wept, then refused to speak for 3 days. What made the silent book so terrifying was not what it said, but what it made one feel it would come, to rest in a stone vault beneath the city. Visitors were rare and always watched, for not all who touched it remained themselves. There were reports, quiet, cautious ones, of scholars who returned with damaged minds. One man recited poetry in languages no one could recognize. Another wandered the streets muttering about a city beneath the desert, where books bled and pages breathed. He died a year later, his last words a riddle no one could solve. To read it is to be read. Some believed the book to be Sufi in origin, a mystical object crafted not with ink, but through centuries of silent devotion. A practice older than speech, perhaps, one passed hand to hand through a lineage that no longer remembers its own name. Others believed it far darker, an artifact from before language, created in the time when human thought was closer to dream than logic, a relic from the era of sound before word, when knowing something meant becoming it. But of all the stories, there is one that lingers, a tale told by moonlight, always in hushed voices. They say that in the 9th century, a wandering mystic arrived at some. He came from the east, wearing robes of undyed wool and carrying nothing but a staff and a sack of stones. He did not speak, but when he touched the earth, birds gathered. When he passed a dying fig tree, it bloomed. Locals called him the Hushed One. He slept in the madrasa's courtyard, beneath the shade of its great arch, and each night he sat alone, his eyes closed, his palms laid flat on the ground as if listening. Then one morning he vanished, but where he had sat, they found a book. No one remembered him ever writing, and yet there it was, wrapped in cloth, humming faintly. The elders tried to open it, but none dared touch it again after the first night. One boy had picked it up, only to fall to the ground moments later, screaming of fire behind glass. He survived, but his hair turned white before dusk. He refused to touch food with his hands ever again. The book was buried sealed within stone, and time, That master of forgetting did the rest, until it was found again, reborn into a century of machines and wires. But machines failed here. No photograph held the book's color. No scanner could map its texture. Microphones picked up no sound, and yet the room it sat in always echoed, subtly, like something else was breathing beneath the walls. Modern scholars began to visit, though fewer and fewer returned twice. They reported strange symptoms, tastes, sudden nausea, dreams of falling into staircases made of folded voices. Some could describe entire pages in tears, swearing they had seen cities drawn in inkless lines or dancers choreographed into color. One woman, blind since birth, touched the book and laughed not out of joy, but as if something unbearably familiar had taken her hand. She would later say, "It is not a book, it is a memory, but not ours." And then there were the vibrations, felt not with ears, but with the bones. Thin, pulsing rhythms, like music played through stone. Long after leaving the chamber, people reported feeling watched, as if the book had not just been opened, but awakened. Was it a message, a warning, a ritual waiting to be completed? The answer may lie in a page no one dares turn, or perhaps in the space between pages, in the subtle shift of breath between reader and silence. Today, the silent book rests in a temperature-controlled vault, untouched for decades. But the room it sleeps in is never truly still. Light flickers. Faster there, shadows hold longer. Some visitors stand outside its glass for hours, unable to look away, as if, somehow, they are being remembered. There is a phrase scratched faintly into the inner cover, seen only once under frost and never again. It reads, "To feel is to hear is to open." Then nothing, only color, only vibration, only silence dressed in the shapes of memory. And so it waits, bound not in language, but in the ache that comes just before understanding. Some books are not meant to be read. They are meant to be touched with reverence, with dread, with the tender terror of realizing that perhaps the oldest stories are not spoken at all, only felt. And when the right hands find the right page, perhaps it will speak again. They say the desert keeps no secrets, but that is a lie whispered by those who have never listened to it breathe. For the empty quarter, the Rub al-Khali, is a place of silence so absolute that even time dares not linger. It is not empty, not truly. It is layered, like the folds of a shroud, with things long buried, winds that speak in tongues, echoes of cities whose names have been swallowed whole. And beneath the shifting dunes, where no footsteps remain, something was waiting and moved, untouched, undisturbed for centuries. In the winter of 1931, a man in khaki and leather goggles stood beneath the white sun, lost in the yawning vastness. His name was Alaric Dunn, a British explorer drawn not by glory but by silence. He had served in wars, heard the thunder of cannons, and now sought the hum of nothing. But what he found was not quiet. He followed a rumor, a Bedouin story passed in low voices around desert fires, of a black stone hidden beneath a cairn, one that hummed if touched by the wind. It took him weeks to find it. The cairn itself was unremarkable, no taller than a man's waist, half swallowed by sand, its stones pale with salt and age. But beneath, wrapped in a cloth so fragile it dissolved in his hands, was a slab of slate, dark, cold, and alive. The inscriptions were unlike anything he had ever seen. Not curved, not pictographic, not runic, nor phonetic. They slashed across, the stone in angular patterns like cuts through air, arranged not in lines but in spirals, like wind trapped mid-turn. No symbol repeated, none obeyed grammar. He tried to read them aloud, just once. The words had no anchor in any language, and yet they left a taste in his mouth iron, ozone, old blood. He took the slab to his tent, wrapped it again, and that night the wind did not stop. It clawed at the canvas. It howled and murmured and rattled the metal clasps of his trunk. When he looked at the slate again the next morning, the desert outside was calm, but the symbols seemed to have shifted, not changed, but it was as if they'd moved minutely, leaning toward each other like conspirators in the dark. He sent it to Cairo for study. From there it traveled London, Istanbul, Vienna. Linguists ran their fingers over its face and found no answers. The grooves were too deep to be recent, yet the stone bore no erosion, no wear from time or sand. The inscriptions defied all attempts at translation. Cryptographers attempted to break its code, to no avail. Even the newly formed British intelligence agencies examined it, wondering if it were a cipher, a secret war language. They left more confused than before. Stranger still were the whispers of what happened when it was read aloud. Not in meaning there was no meaning but phonetically, syllable by syllable. In Cairo, a scholar's assistant claimed the lamps flickered and dust fell from the ceiling. In Vienna, a physicist swore the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. And in a private home in Devon, where an occult society gathered to chant, the markings like a prayer, the sand in a decorative hourglass swirled upward and danced inside the glass for hours. They called it the breath of the jinn. It earned a name, the cryptogram of the desert wind. Not a book, not a scroll, but a whisper carved into stone. A message in a language not for man. One scholar, Persian mystic, named Barzan, spent 3 years alone with the stone. He never tried to decode it. He only listened. He sat with it in silence, hands on its cool surface. And one night he wrote in his journal, "It is not a message. It is an echo, the memory of something that never had a voice." He died soon after, found in his study with the windows open, sand covering the floor, though no wind had blown that day. Some say the cryptogram is a relic from Uber, the Atlantis of the sands, the city the Quran calls Iram of the pillars, wiped clean by the wrath of heaven for its pride. Others believe it is older still, a shard of the first language, spoken before tongues learnt shame. There are even those who whisper that it was never carved by hands, but etched by the desert itself, wind against stone, century after century, until a message formed not by design, but by desire. Today, it rests in a glass case in a museum basement, unlisted, unseen, unspoken. Visitors walk past it without knowing, drawn sometimes by a cold current in the air, a brief pressure behind the eyes, a humming in the bones that fades before it can be named. The slab lies silent, and yet not still. Some curators refuse to work the night shift near it. One guard swore the glass fogged from the inside. No explanation ever satisfies. No scan ever reveals more. They tried once to photograph it in infrared. The film came back blank except for one frame, where the symbols glowed faintly like embers, just before the image dissolved into white noise, and so it waits in the world's quiet corners. There are things not meant to be understood, only endured. Messages not sent to us, but left behind, like shadows thrown on stone. Perhaps the cryptogram is not meant to be read, but to be remembered, like the wind that carries voices from a distance too far to cross, like a name forgotten but still mourned. The desert buries its secrets, yes, but some it leaves just beneath the surface, close enough to find, far too deep to grasp. And when the wind stirs again in the empty quarter, soft and low and full of teeth, it may be calling not to us, but to the stone in the hush of winter rain. In a forgotten wing of an Austrian university, where the ceilings sag and the windows sigh with condensation, there is a crate no one remembers ordering. The address label is smeared, as though blurred by breath or time, and the return slot is bare. It is an old crate, made of blackened pine, its edges held not by nails, but by brass pins, tarnished green. The wood smells of river silt and dry parchment. It rocks faintly when touched, as if something within shifts like a creature dreaming lightly in its sleep. When the crate is finally opened, it is not with excitement, but a kind of solemn awe, as though those present know, without knowing why, that they should whisper. Nestled inside, wrapped in a shroud of rotting velvet, lies a book, leather-bound, unmarked, heavy. Its spine is ridged like a backbone, its cover stitched closed by what appears to be thread made of fine animal sinew. No title, no author, no emblem. Just the weight of something ancient and listening. The book is placed in the university's rare Manuscripts room, among codices that smell of dust and foxing, amid the silence that comes only in the presence of things forgotten by time. For several days the book remains shut. Then, one night, a janitor cleaning the floor mutters a loud grumbling about the cold. The silence, the loneliness of empty halls echoing with nothing but shoes and sighs. He glances at the book, half joking, and says, "Do you get lonely, too?" In the morning, the first line of text appears thin, dark, curling ink spidered across the first page, as though freshly written by an unseen hand. Yes, that the news spreads, quiet at first, like a shadow across polished floors. Professors arrive, historians lean in, magnifiers in hand. Linguists clutch their notebooks. The language something old, but not dead is, part Latin, part old High German, laced with glyphs no one recognizes, as though the book speaks in echoes of tongues never fully formed. It doesn't respond to writing. Pens are ignored. Pages, torn or marked, heal themselves by the following dawn. But when questions are spoken aloud in its presence, real questions, meant not as tricks or tests, the book answers. It speaks in riddles, in parables, in mournful prose that hums faintly. As it forms, when asked about the stars, it replied with, "They are the eyes of those who never returned." When asked who made it, the words came slowly, "I was born from listening." One professor, skeptical and re-died from sleepless nights, asked how many questions it could answer. The page darkened. A single line appeared. Just enough. The book never repeats itself. Once an answer is given, the page remains as it is. It does not erase, does not revise. The words are permanent, but quiet. They do not glow or dance. They do not shimmer with arcane energy. They simply are ink that drinks the light and sits heavy on the page like a secret not meant to be spoken aloud. People begin to treat it like a shrine. They come at night, cloaked in the candlelight of academic desperation. Some ask about love, lost. Some ask about the dead. One woman placed her wedding ring on the book and asked where her husband had gone. The response was a single word, north. She left that night and never returned. Others pressed harder, asking it to reveal itself, to name its author, to prove its purpose. The book grew slower, the ink fainter. It answered, still, but with delay, as though thinking, or retreating. And then one day, it stopped. No final message, no flourish, just silence. The pages remained open. The ink stayed fixed in its answers, but no new words would come. Professors raged, prayed, wept. A priest was brought in and left with his hands trembling. Students swore they heard whispers when alone in the room. One claimed the lights flickered in Morse code. Another insisted the air turned thick when you tried to lie in its presence. No recordings caught these things, only stories, only echoes. The leather cover was examined again. Beneath the surface were faint indentations, not letters, but lines, like scars or veins, patterns that looked like tree roots or branching rivers. Someone whispered it looked like the nervous system of a body. Another said it mirrored constellations. Still, the book said nothing, and so it was placed back on its pedestal in the archive under glass, behind velvet ropes, in a room few visit now. Its crate was burned, the ash of its velvet wrapping scattered into the river behind the university. No one remembered who signed for the package. No delivery log could be found. The janitor who first saw it never came back. A slip was found in his locker, a line copied in his rough handwriting. The book listened too closely. Visitors still come. They look. Some lean close and whisper into the glass, as though a confession might stir it. But it remains still, blank, unmoved. And yet there is a feeling, even now, when you stand before it. A silence too full, like a room where someone is holding their breath. A sensation beneath the skin, as though something is watching through the ink. Some say it is not that the book stopped responding. It simply heard enough, and in the deepest hours of the night, in the part of the building where the lights always seem to dim just a little too early, there are those who swear they see a new line written in the corner of the last page, faint like breath on a mirror, still here.